We are ready. Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Let me find the right paperwork here. Good evening. It is 6 o'clock, so I will call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of Thursday, May 9th, 2024. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional First People of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Jess, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis.
Present.
Mr. Mosier.
Here.
Mr. Pike.
Here.
Mr. Yestad.
Here.
Ms. Carlson.
Here.
Mr. Saline.
Here. Great, thank you. So tonight we are gathered to conduct round 2 of our municipal attorney applicant interviews. We do have the single applicant that has made it this far, Anne Marie Billingsley. So we will be getting her on the line here in just 1 minute to go over some further questions. My anticipated goal tonight, this is an opportunity for the assembly to dive a little deeper. We had some "Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you" questions. And this is an opportunity for you to really dig deeper and find out if this candidate is going to be a suitable fit, not only for yourself, but for the community as well. So we have some interview questions that were submitted by department heads. This is not something we've done in the past, but after reading them, found it to be a great exercise because this is the areas of concern for these department heads. This is the area of the concern for their department, and they may be reaching out to legal with some of these questions. I don't feel that you are limited to either of these, though. Feel like you can ask any sort of question that is allowable. We do have the don't ask questions as well in front of us in case you're curious. So yeah, I think we're scheduled. Jess, can you confirm an hour and a half?
She's online.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're scheduled for an hour and a half?
2 hours.
Oh, 2 hours.
Mhm.
Uh-oh, Anne Marie, are you ready for 2 hours? Welcome and thank you for joining us. I was just giving a brief introduction to the assembly of tonight's happenings, but thank you for once again taking the time on fairly short notice from our last meeting in order to dive a little deeper into this process and learn a little bit more about you and answer some of the questions that we might have. So I do appreciate your time. Looks like we got JJ on now. We'll have IT swap back to Anne Marie here in perhaps just a second. IT is the easiest thing. That's why everyone's clamoring to do that job. I don't think you could pay me enough to do it. Anne Marie, any questions for us before we start tonight's proceedings?
Well, somehow I just got muted. Are you guys?
We can hear you again now. And we can see you again.
And you can see me again. Okay, all the things just changed on my screen. Okay, hi.
Any questions for us before we start this evening?
No, I'm ready to go.
Awesome, thank you. Anything from the assembly before we get started? Perfect. I think we'll just jump right into it in the essence of time and hopefully get us out of here before 2 hours. But again, thank you for your willingness. Chris?
Yeah. Hi, Anne Marie. This is Chris.
Hello.
I'll start this evening, and I'll actually start with one of our first questions. Some of our staff from our harbor master. I am their liaison, and it's actually where my political career started, was with that commission. So I'll start with that, though I know you kind of touched on it in your writing piece there. But what is your experience with maritime law? If none, do you have any outside resources that specialize in this type of law if needed?
So none, the answer is none. But in even after our last discussion at the last interview where you were talking about these potential ballot initiatives and challenges and things, I did a little bit of reading. I read the court case that came out of Maine and kind of looked at the scheme on the sort of a cursory look though on the scheme about what you're limited to the tax dollars that you collect on your cruise passengers and how you can utilize those funds and things. And so it's an area of law that I don't really know anything about, but it's not unique, and the issues that you're having are not unique to Sitka. And so, I saw also that Juneau's having similar things. I know a number of the municipal attorneys that are practicing up in Juneau, so easy enough for me to pick up the phone and say, what are you guys doing? How are you dealing with this? And is there a way to get me up to speed? Other than, calling the municipal attorneys in Juneau, I don't have any, specific resources, but I'd look at this kind of area of law similar to the way that I learned almost all of the areas of law in municipal law, where it's particularly in Alaska, it's a pretty discrete body of law. There's your Alaska statutes, there's regulations, and sort of once you learn them, you know them. And so I don't think there would be really any challenge for me to pretty quickly get up to speed there.
Yeah, no, I know from a harbor standpoint, we don't usually lean on legal too much, so I don't think you'd see too much from the harbor department. I do know that we have something pending with legal right now, so you might actually get to jump in on that if you get the position.
Hi, Anne Marie. I'm also going to lean on some of these questions that we've gotten from staff that are very pertinent. This question is, municipal legal departments serve various stakeholders, including elected officials, employees, and the general public. How do you prioritize tasks to ensure alignment with the broader goals and objectives of the municipality while managing workload demands? Additionally, could you provide an example of a situation where you had to balance competing priorities effectively?
Gosh, I feel like all of my work is balancing competing priorities, but I think the instance that sort of brings to head the most is maybe in my role in our COVID response. So COVID was, you all experienced it as well, but there were a lot of things a lot of balls in the air. The HR department had specific requests. I ended up drafting an FAQ to help specifically the employees of the municipality understand what their rights and abilities were with the FFCRA regulations and things like that. And then, the whole masking thing. And there was this element of department directors. COVID affected everybody, even the planning commission trying to figure out, can we do our meetings remotely and how is that going to work? And then how this all was going to affect the public. We need to make sure the public still has access to our meetings and to our government, essentially, which then was all very suddenly taken off site, and people were working from their homes and things like that. And so I think that the best example of trying to deal with assembly members and elected officials, as well as department heads, and then also trying to protect the interests of the public and making sure the public had access and clear information. And then your question about sort of how do I do that? I think the simplest answer is, I work for the entity, and the entity consists of the people it represents, plus the elected officials, plus the department heads. And so really, I'm pretty cognizant of balancing all of those needs. And it happens also in these quasi-judicial meetings, when we have like an animal control commission here, and the planning commission can do these quasi judicial hearings where people's rights are affected. And so one of my roles at those meetings is to make sure people's due process rights are heard, while still ensuring that this commission understands what all of the code provisions are and the requirements of them, while also having a department that's trying to put forth their objectives. And so I think I'm pretty adept at balancing those three pieces. I've been doing it for a number of years.
Okay, thank you.
So this question relates back to things that you will see on a regular basis. Important to me to hear the answer, and important if you think you would need to brush up in order to brush up on this, because it does happen on a regular basis. So as municipal attorney, you will be called upon for expert advice on Public Records, Open Meetings Act, and conflicts of interest. What knowledge and or experience do you have that makes you an expert on these topics?
Public records, open meetings, and conflicts of interest. Okay.
Conflicts of interest, yes.
Yeah, so for Public Records and Open Meetings Act, I am the attorney that often provided the trainings to, well, Open Meetings Act for sure, to the different boards and commissions and things, explaining what the Open Meetings Act was. And I think the Open Meetings Act is awesome. I think it really helps transparent government, and I would tell commissioners and newly elected officials, the Open Meetings Act is our friend. Like, it's going to protect you. If you abide by the Open Meetings Act, it makes my job so much easier. It makes good sense. And my supervisor, Jill, the Fairbanks Borough Attorney, she also would give trainings on both Public Records and the Open Meetings Act at the NEO, the newly elected official conference at AML. And so we had trainings in our office that we would give not only to Fairbanks staff, but also to all newly elected officials in the state of Alaska as part of that AML conference. So that the Public Records was more about training staff as well, while we would tell the elected officials and folks, you know, your text messages and your things on your personal devices can be public records. There was an element of that, but mostly the public records trainings took place within the departments and the staff. And I played a pretty integral role whenever we would get a massive public records request that crossed departments. All of the public records came through our office, and so public records requests. So we would, sometimes it was after the fact, if it was sort of a routine public records request, but review all of them. And sometimes it was a learning thing, like, hey, maybe we need to train a little better on redacting certain things, or often I would be consulted on, should this be released? Is this a public record? Does this fall within an exception? And the Fairbanks Northside Borough had a code provision saying they wanted to be as liberal as possible on their public records. So the Public Records Act has enumerated exceptions. And if there ever was sort of a gray area, you know, does this fall within an exception? Fairbanks's policy was to disclose it. And so it left, there were often questions about what gets redacted and what doesn't, and things like that. And then for conflicts, I worked with the instance of conflicts would come up the most. Well, there's all different kinds of conflicts, I should say. So with the Planning Commission, I would encourage the commission to disclose their conflicts in advance if they knew them. You know, that was part of all of the trainings, is review your agendas, know what's on the agendas, what's coming before you. Sometimes it would be a surprise, you know, somebody would show up and it'd be like, oh my gosh, that's my mother, or whatever. That's an easy conflict. But, you know, and then helping the chair walk through in Planning Commission land, the chair was the one that would rule on the conflicts. So helping the chair to walk through the questions to ask to ensure whether or not there was a conflict with borough code. But we'd also have conflicts on like, a staff member that wanted to do outside employment, and would that be cause a conflict for the borough? And we had a conflict of interest routing slip that had to come through my office, and I would give my 2 cents on whether I thought there was a conflict, and then the borough attorney would eventually sign off on her opinion. And if she wasn't there, it would be me. So there was like employment conflicts, but then also the conflicts under the code of, do you have a substantial financial interest? Do you have a personal relationship that would make you unable to be fair and impartial, and those kinds of things? And yeah, I imagine that happens sort of regularly in such a small town like Sitka, but it happens surprisingly often in Fairbanks as well. And when I was advising the Board of Equalization, I was like, if you're concerned at all, just disclose it. I'd rather have it on the record, and we can walk through whether this is a substantial financial interest or something like that. And I had commissioners saying, I think that was my teacher in second grade, but I don't quite remember. Or I think I saw that person in the grocery store the other day. So there's a spectrum of what you need to disclose. And I've read your conflict of interest provision. You have the similar substantial financial interest language and things like that. And so I'm guessing it'll be pretty comparable to the analysis I'm accustomed to.
Thank you. Not only did you hit the points on which I asked, but you hit a lot of points around that same area. So extremely excited to hear your answer on that. Excited to hear your passion about that one, because that one is very important to us. In addition, the Board of Equalization, we don't often meet as that, but when we do, me personally as mayor, I need your help on that. And it sounds like I can reach out for help on that. So thank you for expanding on that question.
Hi, Emery, Tim Pike. I'm a liaison to the Police and Fire Commission, and they have some questions here. How do you stay informed and updated on changes in law and regulations related to law enforcement?
So like I said in my little writing sample there, I'm not sure if you all had an opportunity to read it, but the 3 departments that you all have that I have not advised is Electric, Harbors, and Police. So taking that into consideration, I stay I stay up to date on all of the changes in the law. Over the past years, I've paid less attention to the police things because I didn't have direct applicability to me, but I'm on the, listservs where I get updates on all of the Alaska Supreme Court case laws. The IMLA, the International Municipal Lawyers Association, has their own case updates that are of sort of national importance, anything in the Ninth Circuit or anything like that. And so while I might not pull each, opinion if it has no real applicability to me, anything dealing with municipal law in general will catch my eye. And I think I'm fairly up to date on any changes affecting the police. There's a lot of national litigation and things over police issues as well. And just in general, I read the news and am informed. And then part of the Alaska Bar Association, they have Supreme Court case law updates, like United States Supreme Court, Alaska Supreme Court, and those will hit all the topics that the courts dealt with. And those are usually annual. Sometimes there's a semi-annual, and then sometimes they're department specific. And while I don't think I've listened to any on police, those police topics tend to be of general interest to folks. And so often at these law conference things, police stuff takes up a bunch of the time. And I would say also that, Fairbanks as a second class borough is the minority. There's more first class home rule charter municipalities in Alaska. And so all of our AMAA conferences, the Alaska Municipal Attorneys Association conferences, there's police topics every year. And so I've been following these updates. I just haven't had any reason to implement them.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Scotty Celine. I'm wondering if you could imagine like a subpoena or a resolution where the city and borough of Sitka has the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs come and sit at this table and answer questions, particularly if the BIA was found guilty of malfeasance and incompetence in managing Indian property nationwide. And the Sitka Tribe of Alaska received $1.58 million from the Cobell decision. Do you think that that's the basis for continuing obfuscation of partnership properties here in the village that has now had Sitka become awarded with in the top 10 endangered places in Alaska? Could you see that where a borough has a fed that nobody knows their extension to call the BIA when you ask about these properties that are aggravating the town on Catlean Street and causing a public safety hazard? And so it really be great to have some legal wherewithal and force them to come here and sit right across from there and answer a few questions that the town would have. Never had anybody ask you that before, huh?
Well, I mean, I hear the heart of your desire. I mean, I can't imagine that you all have subpoena power. It's possible through the courts. Sure. Could I envision some kind of public safety hazard situation in which you get involved with litigation against the Bureau of Indian Affairs and you have to, and I would have to subpoena people to get them to come into a court? Absolutely, that could happen for sure. I mean, you're going to have jurisdiction issues and things to work through there, but I would be harder pressed to envision subpoenaing someone to sit at a municipal assembly meeting and answer questions. I don't want to say it's not possible, because maybe there is a mechanism there. I'm not from a municipality where there is police powers, and so you may have more authority than I'm used to, but certainly would be easy enough to figure out.
I like that. Easy enough to figure out. I can't wait to have you walk through the Indian village. Hurry up, get here.
Hi, Anne Marie, JJ, also on Zoom, so I don't know if you can see me, but can you hear me well?
I can, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that write-up. Your labor and employment law experience is fantastic. Kind of talking similar to that, but about contract work. What's your familiarity? Because we do a few services, so like our solid waste is a contract and convention visitor services is a contract. What's your experience with writing and fact checking and all of that?
I would say extensive. My first Alaska Supreme Court published case was a contract interpretation issue. And so, and throughout my 6 years at the Fairbanks North Borough, I reviewed, drafted, edited. I couldn't even count how many contracts, but our model was set up so that my office reviewed all kinds of contracts. So not even just like these big contracts like you're talking about with a solid waste contractor, but if you wanted to rent a pavilion in the park, that contract might come across my desk. And so, and they all, I also, a lot of the, writing things like waivers and things that are contracts, but you don't think about in the little sort of contract box. They all have the same elements and the same protections and the same things that you want to ensure. And I'm trying to think if I've ever had like a breach of contract issue. I mean, I know we've had many, hey, we think that you guys could be approaching a breach of contract here, and it's important to learn lessons from those things too. Like, oh, I wish we had this in our contract because that would have been really helpful. Or and so I've seen a lot of those things as well. I've learned a lot of experiences in that way, particularly when you're spinning up a new program or whatnot, and it's like, oh, we didn't even think to include this in our contract. But contracts with outfits like like a solid waste, that's, you're going to want to tailor it to the specific situations and things, but those are, I don't want to say boilerplate, but they're going to have the same standard provisions that you just want to make sure are there. And that was part of my workflow, was regular contracts that would come through, and I would have to sign off on them before anybody that could sign to bind the municipality. So all different kinds of contracts.
Great, thank you, because that's an important piece to the overall picture here, is how it all fits together. Thank you.
Well, we came back around to me. This is Chris again. So we've kind of taken, I guess it's a new approach within the city, but we look at risk management a lot now. And I'm wondering, how would you manage risk that requires a balance between practicality, probability, and magnitude of risk? Describe your approach to managing this risk for the municipality.
And that's, I mean, you hit it right on the head. I mean, risk management really is just a balancing act. And I've kind of viewed my role as sort of giving you the most conservative option, and then helping you all understand, this is an avenue you can take. There is some risk associated with it. Here's what I think the probability of success would be, the likelihood of that coming to fruition. And a lot of this is going to depend on what your comfort zone is. So I view my role more as advising you on what the risks are and what the likelihood of those risks coming to fruition. We had I've worked with, I think, 4 different risk managers at the borough, all of whom had different viewpoints on how much to tolerate risk. But we also had a risk committee, which involved like the CFO and legal and the risk HRs, things like that, depending on what the issue was, so that you have different kind of viewpoints on, that the CFO has a different idea about risk tolerance than the attorney. And so it actually was a really great learning experience for me to think about the different elements of risk management from these different viewpoints. And by the end, I kind of had a pretty good picture of, okay, the attorney usually is the more conservative one. But at least it's part of this, if this goes wrong, here are all of the things that could happen legally. And really that's just an educating. That's like, just, you need to understand that if you get sued for this, here's what the liability could be. And so I think it's also really important to kind of have a pretty good grasp on, yeah, this could be risky, but you know what? The benefits outweigh the risk. And so this is something we're interested in doing. Whether I would be that decision maker, or I would, you all would be voting on whether it was something you'd want to do after hearing my analysis. I don't know how that's structured for you guys.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm up next. The question is, how do you support code interpretations when portions of code may be outdated, for example, written for a time before the internet?
It reminds me of, like, we have these publishing notice requirements where you have to publish your notice X amount of times. And, if the newspaper doesn't correspond with that timeline, it's really really challenging to get that notice published in those times and things like that. And so I've dealt with those things as well. And a lot of it is just like, let's flag it and fix it. Sometimes that doesn't help you in your immediate issue, but once you identify it, easy enough to to say, okay, this is an issue, this is outdated. We need an ordinance to propose a change, and you all need to vote on what you want that change to look like, if everybody agrees that it's outdated. What to do when it's outdated and you have something pending right in front of you, I think that's really sort of it's context specific. You know, it really would depend on what the issue was that you were dealing with, where you had an outdated code provision. But my overall answer is, you need to fix your code. You need to get an ordinance out there that would enable you to get with the times.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to ask the easiest question and the hardest question you've ever been asked, all in the same one. And if you've been to newly elected officials training, you've undoubtedly heard the varying opinions and the strong opinions on this one. Do you take minutes in executive session, and why or why not? And what is your personal stance on it, and how would you advise this assembly?
So I don't take any minutes. I don't usually, but that's also not my role as the attorney. I don't take minutes. It's not my role. We record our executive sessions, and then what we do with those recordings and who has access to them, and you know, that also is well, that's not tricky. They've made that decision, and that's set. But in terms of taking minutes and who's available to them, I don't do it. I haven't done it, but we also have recordings. So and those recordings are locked, and only certain people have access to them. And if we needed to get minutes to create minutes for a very specific instance, they could do it. So
I guess minutes and or recordings, or you know, does anything come out of executive session? And what would be your stance on advising this assembly how to move forward?
And typically after the executive session, there's some response about, you know, we met in executive session, and here's the snippet of, you know, what we discussed and what the outcome is, or we came out of executive session and then you go into a vote, so that the vote and maybe some of the deliberations then could be public. But in the municipality that I worked for, they did record them, and had very specific provisions on what happened to those recordings and where they went, and who had access to them. And so my personal feelings is, I mean, I guess I could envision a time when I would say, you're really going to want something, depending on if, you know, you were getting, I mean, the things that I go into executive session for, it's a lot of this is attorney-client privileged stuff. And I don't think there needs to be it's not like somebody could, I guess somebody could waive the privilege, but that's certainly not what I would advise. So yeah, I'm accustomed to working in a municipality where we do record, but it's my preference to not.
Understood. Thank you.
Hello again. So school funding, I don't know how familiar you are with all the ins and outs of this wonderful BSA conversation that keeps being had. I understand Fairbanks has been struggling with it. So we have as well. And we do fund to the cap. And you know, the cap, if you're familiar with it, I think the question is, we all got a letter from the State Department of Education saying, be very careful about what goes in and outside the cap. What is your familiarity with school cap, I guess, legalities, law?
Yeah, this has been a struggle, I think, you know, for many municipalities across Alaska. The Fairbanks just had a special election yesterday, Tuesday, today's Thursday. They had a special election on Tuesday to try to raise the tax cap, with the hope of getting the ability to raise $10 million more to give to our schools, because the Fairbanks School District is struggling with this exact BSA issue that many school districts across Alaska are faced with. And the election failed, so that borough is unable to increase its tax cap to try to give more funding to the schools. And it's a difficult situation about trying to figure out how to fund the schools in a sustainable way. There's ways to move money around and things, but none of that gives the stability and the consistency that the schools are looking for. And then there's also this issue of, well, this should really happen at the legislature, and it shouldn't be up to the local municipalities to get the schools where they need to be, or where the schools are saying they need to be. So I guess your question is, what's my familiarity with it? I'm pretty familiar with it because it's really been such a big issue here in Fairbanks. And I also have school-aged children that are in Fairbanks Public Schools. And so it's also an important issue to me because it directly affects, not only my kids, but also the children of all the rest of their friends, their peers, and everybody else in the schools.
Thank you.
I didn't have any more questions, but what Chris brought up, the risk deal, I can't wait for you to get here and defend the city keeping the sidewalk closed on Catlean and try to explain to me and my constituents how that risk factor weighs out with buses going by, fuel trucks, grandmas with baby carriages going by, everybody right at a bottleneck, and it's going on 4 years now. It's kind of like a big zit on the tail of two cities for Sitka.
JJ, again, extrapolating on kind of land use, your experience with land use law, with zoning, litigation, permits, that's great. Let's talk a bit about leases. The city and borough of Sitka holds a lot of land, and to get it in use, we lease quite a bit. We have a gravel pit that we lease, other things, tidelands leases, all sorts of fun stuff like that. So you talk a bit about your real property agreements understanding and just your lease experience.
Sure. Well, I advise the boroughs, they changed the name of it. I think it ended up being the Department of Natural Resources is the name. Yeah, I think that's what they switched it to. And they're the ones that are in charge of dealing with borough land. And I advised them. So for the first time, they started doing financing so that more people could take advantage of using the land. And so, I was pretty involved in that process, and then the subsequent process of what happens when the person doesn't pay and the legal action that then would need to ensue when somebody is leasing borough land and not meeting their obligations in their either financing agreement, or even if it wasn't borough financed, if it was owner finance, or if it was financed, traditionally from a bank, if there was some kind of default, getting involved in, how do you handle it? So I've reviewed a lot of leases. I've been through a number of these processes where, even if it's these like eviction kind of things, or having to then take ownership of the property back and get it back out into public hands. And there's so I guess I've reviewed the actual leases, but then I've also been sort of an advisor on the day-to-day. What do I do? Like how do we avoid having to deal with an eviction? How do we get this land back out into the community quickly after we've had some kind of default or things like that?
Thank you. And another piece to that too is our airport is kind of half-seas with the state. They have the strip and a lot of the runway and kind of the plane parking. but the actual terminal building is a city facility, but we lease the land under it. So that's kind of an ongoing agreement that we're it's fresh in our minds since we're expanding the airport right now, and that lease process had some negotiations as part of it. So have you been through lease negotiations before?
We also here in Fairbanks have an interesting relationship with the airport and the land and taxing the tenants of the airport, the coffee shop owner or whatnot, and how to do that tax valuation and things. And so I did all of that. I can't think of being involved in the direct lease negotiations. Actually, that's not true. The Birch Hill, which is our one of our Parks and Rec facilities, is half owned by the military. There's like military land, and I did a lease negotiation with them. We had a lease in place that we were just renewing every 10 years or whatever it was, but they had like a change of command, and they had new lease, new forms and new whatever. And so we had to renegotiate the lease agreements over for the borough to use the land for their ski trails and things that was military owned. And there's some interesting provisions there too, where, you know, they can come in and use it during these times and things like that. And so that's the only specific, like sitting at the table negotiating with the people that I can think about, but I've given advice on like specific questions on like, hey, how important is this thing for enforcing a lease or something like that?
Thank you. Yeah, you'll find lots of unique dynamics that we have here. So I appreciate it.
Okay, we're back to me here. I'll keep it on the kind of land theme here. What is your experience with federal and/or state land use law as it pertains to local land use regulations such as zoning? And then kind of another part of this question is, I'm just thinking of something that may be a potentiality here in the future of, what is your experience with like land swap? I guess I'll leave it at that.
So we have, I've written a number of legal opinions on sort of this area of preemption, like whose law is the ruling law. And the thing that's coming to mind is with the railroad land, where can the borough impose its zoning requirements on this sort of federal land that's owned railroad land? And a couple the zoning at the airport as well has been an issue that I can remember weighing in on. But in terms of federal and state land use law, the only real experience I have with federal land use law is this preemption issue of can we impose our land use requirements on this land, or is it preempted? And then I have a lot of experience with local zoning laws, the borough zoning code, defending the zoning code, making changes to the zoning code. And so local land use law, I'm really familiar with, not as familiar with federal land use law.
Okay, thank you.
Where does the most risk lie in the procurement process, from RFP development through notice to proceed? And what role does the municipal attorney play in the process?
So gosh, where does the most risk lie? I mean, there's risk inherent in every stage. I don't know that I have a good answer for like, if you do a really bad RFP, that's where all your trouble's going to be, because I've seen trouble all the way down the line. I think,
and maybe you can just Also, you don't have to stick to the letter of this question. Maybe explain your experience as well with developing RFPs.
So I don't have extensive experience developing RFPs, though I've been involved in them. And I've also been on the evaluation committee side when the municipality puts out an RFP and then they come back and we have to, score them and things like that. And my office has handled some pretty big procurement disputes going to like disqualify bidders and kind of going through that whole process, challenges to the RFPs. I've dealt with also issues about public records requests coming to try to get specific pieces of information through this RFP process and trying to decide whether they're like trade secret and things like that. My experience though with so I was never really involved in like every step of the process. Like there are other attorneys in my office that would handle those sort of overseeing things. I have handled discrete questions about, like I was saying, sort of this disqualification of bidders or and I've also seen things I've had to weigh in on. Do we need an RFP for these? Can we sole source this? Is there a good justification for bypassing this RFP process? And I've weighed in on those kind of issues as well.
Okay, that's actually relief. A lot of your answers there were really nice there because we come up with the RFP issue comes up very often, and I'm really pleased that your experience with dealing with public records requests regarding that, because that is something that happens sometimes too, and what is proprietary, what is not. So I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you.
So I'll see if I can word this question in the way that it sounds in my head and make it come out to make sense. But in every municipality, there is code, and generally code is put in place for the good of the citizens, protecting order, protecting its people. Code isn't necessarily put in there maliciously, but on the other hand, there are community needs and community desires that may conflict with code. I can think of an instance here where our code is pretty strict on not allowing a food vendor during a closed street day. However, the food vendors, they add to the sense of community during this event. So how do we balance protecting our citizens with code versus the needs and desires of the community?
So some of that, and I'm not familiar with this specific code provision that you're talking about, but in a lot of when clients would come to me with this, I want to have a code provision that does this, I would shy away from anything with too much specificity because it doesn't have the general applicability that you really want. But to get to the crux of, you have your community is saying we don't like this code provision. The way that I think it often works best is, your constituents talk to you and tell you, I don't like this, please sponsor an ordinance that will change this. And then I can work with you on drafting an ordinance that fits into your code and does whatever you need it to do, but then it goes to a vote. And so the assembly will then decide whether they think this code change is a good one. And that I think is really, as you all as elected officials have your own constituents to respond to. And so if all of your constituents also want this code change, then you vote and you change the code, and then it should reflect the community desires. And that's part of this, and then as you all get termed out or don't get reelected or whatnot, and new people come in, then the code is going to reflect the current desires. And so part of it is also educating if there's really good reasons for how this came to be and why it is, maybe it just hasn't kept up with the times, but maybe understanding the origins of a particular code provision is important. And so I've had instances where, you know, after I look at the legislative history of something and I go back and can look at the minutes of like, why is this even in here? Where did this come from? It can shine a lot of light on maybe this isn't so far off to the community desires. Maybe it's just being misapplied or, you know, something like that. So I think the easiest thing, if the code provision truly doesn't match what the community wants, is you change the code. But if there is some like wiggle room in how it's being applied or what the intent of that provision was in the first place, that's the cool part of, you know, the records and the open meetings and you can just go back and figure out, where did this come from and why is it here and how do we make it useful?
Okay, thank you. And you sparked a follow-on question, and that's about interpretation. So we all understand in policing, policing is a very black and white type event. However, there is a large desire from the community for a community style policing, where that black and white gets a little more blended. Can you see anything like that in code, and how would you work to interpret code for community benefit while managing risk?
Yeah, well, my experience with that has been very, you know, communities want to be involved and citizens want to be involved. Like we even, this is a little bit of a tangent, but like the borough Fairbanks was constructing trails and there were volunteers that wanted to come and like cut down trees and do things. But once you start doing that on behalf of the borough and there's like heavy machinery and equipment and things, it from a risk perspective, it's like, oh my gosh, whoa, somebody gets hurt here and there's a lot of liability on the line. Are we going to hand out chainsaws to people that raise their hand and say, I want to cut down trees to help make a trail? Maybe that's not the best thing, but so different than community policing a little bit. Like I think there are lots of ways for community members to be involved and mitigate risks. Some of them, like, sign this waiver, and then I'll have to litigate whether or not it was a good waiver. If something goes wrong, waivers are not the answer to everything, but sometimes they add the right amount of protection for whatever that particular risk issue is. It's a risk mitigation tool. In terms of community policing, you know, I haven't advised a municipality with a police force, so I'm not completely educated on all of the ways to do that and how that would fit into a code. I think Fairbanks has some like community and policing grants that they get, and I know, and that's the city of Fairbanks. And so like I've seen it. I've seen a model in which this works. I know that there's these grants that exist. How to actually implement that into a code, I would have to really kind of read it and think about it.
Thank you for answering both of the questions.
Keeping with a police theme, what strategies do you employ to mitigate legal risks for public safety during critical incidents, high profile cases, or application of city codes? You kind of covered the codes a little bit, but.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned in the last interview that I was hearing you all kind of weigh the pros and cons of body cameras, and you know, there's lawsuits where folks are upset that they weren't where the police are upset that they weren't provided body cameras. There's lawsuits about whether or not to turn over the body camera footage. There's policies that need to be in place and all that kind of stuff. But that's I don't know if I would call it a risk management tool, but it's certainly an option. I don't know if that answers your question. I can't remember exactly what you were.
Mitigate legal risk for public safety during critical incidents, high profile cases.
Yeah, also we had a pretty good debate about whether our animal control officers should have some kind of like taser or something like that, like just for in terms of public safety and things. And there's a pretty big risk reward analysis that has to go in there too. And the Fairbanks ended up deciding they didn't want to go down that route. My view of it all is to sort of do a risk analysis to present to you all who would be the decision makers on what to employ. And so if part of my job would be to come up with, well, what are some options and what are the risks associated with them and what are the potential benefits?
Thank you.
Kind of going on the mayor's deal on the community policing thing. Could you ever imagine, you know, like this, we're facing like a global collapse of seafood. You got some guys that live in the harbor that are drunk junkies and other guys that are trying to hang on with whatever they got left of a lifestyle. A lot of vehicles could end up used as gear storage and attract the attention. Then quite a few guys complaining about cars being towed away, losing gear, stuff like that. Could you see like a community thing that's set up with your permanent fund as a surety bond? So like anybody in the wintertime when there's no, you know, king salmon or money's hard, that you don't lose your slip or that you don't get your stuff towed because the borough's got some security, you know, like that you put your permanent fund up when you're at risk. Another one for what Chris was talking about, you know, from the Alaska Native Land Claims Act, Catlean Bay was awarded to the Shiatica Native Regional Corporation, and America's been trying to build a road there since '71, and it's halted right now. But people are coming to this body asking that Catlean Bay be zoned, and it's sovereign land, and you know, innuendo about immunity being granted to the Native Regional Healthcare Corporation that would. And, you know, they're buying up all kinds of property in town, not paying taxes, and then being defended by the Justice Department, any contractual disagreements. You know, that's what you're stepping into, you know, as far as coming here and trying to control. If those two entities would build their own love boat dock out at Catlean in the future, how does, you know, people want to get it zoned? How can you zone it? It's sovereign land. Welcome to Sitka.
I'm not sure there was a question in that, so I think I'll I'll jump in. Let's talk about constitutional law from the municipal perspective. Kind of thinking, you know, police, First Amendment, also our library has seen some concerns around First Amendment questions, book bans and such. Like, what have you seen and what do you think? Let's throw in risk management too. What do you see as the most opportunity for some conflict there and your experience?
Part of the reason I really liked advising the library here was because of the First Amendment issues. So they have a big display case in the lobby of the library, and different community groups could put up their, you know, where the ballet is having a thing and here's whatever their display would be. And often we would get questions about, you know, what if the, you know, very polarized, controversial, maybe not even recognized group wants to come in and put up all of their hate-filled things or whatnot. And helping to ensure that we had policies in place about, you know, content neutral restrictions and things that couldn't be, you know, inflammatory or have curse words and profane and things like that in them. We also had some concerns about our like book ban kind of issues. There was an issue about the library selection policy about who could decide who could make a challenge to which books were in the library. And then Parks and Rec has had also a lot of these constitutional law issues with, you have these public forums or limited public forums and time, place, and manner restrictions. And how do you sort of craft those or deal with those challenges? And a lot of it comes down to having policies in place ahead of time that are content neutral or are, you're limited in your time, place, and manner. And it's easy to enforce that. It's hard to deal with a constitutional challenge when you don't have a policy in place. And so part of what I did at the Fairbanks North Star Borough is we had a policy review committee where they were tasked with not only kind of reviewing the policies, but highlighting as well, we need a policy that will address these things as, there's these challenges coming across the country. And that's, constitutional law is a really easy area to watch trends in other municipalities and other places, because everybody in America, like when you're having these US Constitution challenge, that we're all dealing with that same document and how it applies. And so these Alaskan municipalities are not that unique in sort of what these challenges are. And then you get the folks that come in just rabble rousing with their video cameras, trying to get you to say something wrong. And I've seen them here in the post office, I have a right to be here, and I'm cameras and come into your public meetings potentially. There's constitutional law issues with their free speech, coming and saying the things they want to say at your public meetings. And when there was that whole Zoom bombing was occurring, and people were, how do you kick these people out of these meetings? And really, when you have good policies in place, you get 3 minutes, you can talk your 3 minutes, you can say these things, you can talk about whatever you want, but you cannot use hate speech or, use profanity, and then that's an easier area to be in.
Policy and committees is, you mentioned a risk committee earlier, as well as the evaluation committee for RFPs, policy review committee. I think, yes, yeah, that group input is beneficial, and do it at the beginning. Okay, thank you.
Well, Anne Marie, it's been about an hour so far. Typically, we take a break at this point, so I'm sure you would like a break to grab some water and whatnot as well. You've done most of the talking this evening, so we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for any wrap up that we might have or continuing questions.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you. Anne Marie back online?
You bet.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the break. I'm sure you needed it as well. Like I said, you did a lot of the talking at this point. I kind of did an informal poll of assembly members, and it seems like we may just have 1 or 2 questions each. And then I want to give you ample opportunity to talk as well if there's anything you have for us. So, Chris, if you want to start us off again.
Yep, this will be my final one for you this evening. I know tonight and in your writing piece, you said you didn't have a ton of experience with police, but I was curious if you had much experience with fire and EMS and the laws and regulations regarding E EMS.
I'm so glad you just asked me that, because when we were on the break, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've negotiated all of these fire contracts, and they were just such a huge part of this work that I did. And when you were asking me about contracts, I can't believe they didn't come to mind. So the borough provides fire service on a contract model. And so we had these INCs, independent contractors, from like the university, from volunteer fire departments, from city fire departments, and we contracted with each of them to provide this fire service. And gosh, I I tracked those contracts. I recommended changes to all of those contracts. Each of the contracts had specific insurance requirements that the fire providers had to attain, and making recommendations on those insurance levels and things. There were a lot of issues that the borough dealt with in regards to those particular fire contracts. I think they went through three revisions while I was at the borough, where we changed significant portions of those provisions. And I advised the emergency operations department that oversaw all of those fire contracts. And we also, I mean, I guess we do a lot of things by committee, but we had a regional service area advisory committee that I went to all of those meetings as well, where they looked at the provision of fire service on kind of a regional model. So, you know, does it make sense to have these independent service areas? Is there some different economies of scale that we could achieve if you brought the fire service in-house and things like that? And then let's see, because they were independent contractors, I didn't have to deal with any of the sort of day-to-day fire issues. That was all their organizations had to deal with, their hiring and firing and training. We did have in our contracts specific training levels that were required, or a level of service that we demanded. But the individual fire departments could design their own sort of day-to-day things. So I think I'm pretty familiar with the operations of the fire, you know, departments and things themselves, but not in their day-to-day thing, and not in their sort of day-to-day operations.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Anne Marie, I've got one final question. If you, this is not from the list, just something I thought about. If you were hired, what would be your first priorities in the first couple of months to a year?
Well, that's kind of a big stretch. So, I mean, my initial desire would be to sort of understand how your workflow goes, the culture of your organization, the key players in it, form relationships with, you know, the assembly members, the administrator, the clerk, the folks that help make your government go. And then also getting to know the directors and the managers, or whatever your sort of structure looks like, to meeting with them and understanding what their issues are and what their concerns are, and then figuring out how you all want to utilize your attorney. You know, I've seen so many different models of municipal attorneys in all of these different municipalities, not only in Alaska, but all across the country. And I think a lot of it depends on your wants, but also the personality of the attorney. And so, I've seen some attorneys that just sit and wait for their work assignments. And when you have a legal question, you submit a work assignment and then you get a legal response back. And that attorney might come to your public meetings and wait to be asked a question. I think there's different, I've seen a lot of public meetings with attorneys that interject all the time. I think that doing attorney advising in a public meeting is really an art. It can be really challenging to figure out when to weigh in, when to just stay quiet and let the assembly get there themselves, when to contradict an assembly member and say, oh, you got that wrong. That's a challenging thing to do. So doing it in a way that's not gonna, doing it in the most tactful way possible in a public meeting to tell. That's kind of getting off on a tangent than your question about what I'm going to do. But my vision would be to really get to know you all and your preferences and desires. I had some elected officials that were like, don't ever correct me on the record. That's no bad. We'll take a break. We'll, write me a memo ahead of time. What different strategies for that? So a lot of it in that first few months is getting to know what the issues are, getting my arms around them from a legal research standpoint, and then getting up to speed on any current litigation or things that you have going. After a year, I would hope to sort of understand all of your departments and what you're doing and how you're doing them and what your all's priorities are, and have a pretty clear picture of how I could help achieve all of the different goals. And then maybe after 2 years, start highlighting areas of code or things like, hey, maybe somebody should really look at cleaning this up or fixing this, or coming up with my own list of ways that you could make improvements that might not even be on your radar yet.
Okay, thank you.
My question is going to be two questions in one because they're both fairly simple. The first one is, would you intend in your off time to continue your private practice if hired by the municipality? And the second one is, in your role, you do have a legal assistant. I'm not anticipating you needing to hire that position anytime soon, but you may have to in the future. What is your comfort level with hiring someone to work with you on your team?
I would not continue on my private practice. I would have to do a little bit of winding down. I have a couple of things still going that that I would want to see to completion. And so whether that meant taking leave or somehow working out with you all some, leave without pay or something initially to wrap up some things if they interfered with my start date and that kind of logistical things. But after that, I would not, I would be, devoted to you all. I think I'd have a big enough learning curve in figuring out your municipality and learning this whole new group of people and things like that my interest would be, or my attention would be devoted solely to you all. And then, gosh, what was the second thing that you just asked me?
So your department does have a legal assistant.
Oh, the legal assistant, right? Okay, gosh, I you normally would have jotted that down, and for whatever reason, I just didn't. So I have been on a lot of hiring panels at the borough in hiring numerous different positions, and I think hiring my own legal assistant is like pretty exciting. I think I would prefer to work with somebody that has experience, particularly if I'm new in the position, and somebody that can help serve as that transition between, here's how we do things in this office, and it's just much easier than completely starting from scratch. And so I would absolutely value that person and that institutional knowledge there. But if I needed to hire my own legal assistant, I think it'd be exciting.
Thank you.
This will be my final question as well. So can you, you've talked a little bit about it, but can you expand on your experience with negotiating contracts with unions?
Yeah, that I think I could say hands down that was my very favorite. I don't think I ever had more fun than those collective bargaining negotiations at the borough. So we had bargaining teams, which you know, consensus is, I guess, the way to go. And so I was on this bargaining team. I think there were 5 bargaining team members. And we would negotiate the union contracts. We'd have proposals that would get exchanged, and the proposals that would each department director would be able to submit things that they would want to see changed. Normally the HR director was the person that kind of compiled everything and then would draft up what those proposed changes might look like, and then they would come to me and I would weigh in on whatever on all those different proposed changes, add all my comments and track changes and things like that. And I also had my own list as we went through our collective bargaining agreements were on 3-year cycles of things that I thought should get changed, whether it was just clarifying language, an issue would come up and there was some ambiguity and I had to interpret the contract where I thought, wow, we really should fix this language so that this isn't going to be an issue going forward. And maybe something that wasn't an issue, but somebody from HR had called being like, how are you reading this? And then we would exchange the proposals, and then we'd have negotiation time, table time, where we would actually all sit around a table and negotiate article by article till you reach a tentative agreement. And we'd do caucusing in between to talk about different positions or strategies. I played a pretty big role in actually drafting the language, and I have a pretty good attention to detail, and through my years of litigating contracts and things, I understand the importance of a comma or and a collective bargaining agreement too is unique in that your employees need to be able to read, interpret, make sense of these things. So it needs to be a really accessible document. This isn't just like a contract that's between these sophisticated legal entities. There's, all employees of the borough need to be able to read and understand what these documents are accomplishing. And so I did a lot of editing and wordsmithing and drafting and things like that. And I did a lot of reviewing the bargaining agreements at the end as well, to get them into their final places. And then after they were approved by the assembly and in place, then I'd do a lot of interpreting of them and making sure that the borough was following the provisions in them. If I noticed somewhere where a department or somebody would say, hey, we want to do this or that, I'd be like, well, your collective bargaining agreement doesn't allow that. I knew those agreements fairly well. Like I could tell you which article a number of these different provisions were in, because I referred to them so often. I guess maybe that's even more information than you were actually asking for. But
No, that's great. Thank you.
No further questions.
Let's change gears to public relations, kind of written public relations. Do you see it as part of the role of municipal attorney to kind of review press releases, social media posts, things of that nature?
At the borough here, we had a public information officer who I worked pretty closely with. Facebook posts, there were some issues that we needed to get worked out because we had no real guidelines on Facebook, and so all these different departments would have their own Facebook pages. Parks and Rec had a Facebook page, the animal shelter had a Facebook page, the library had a Facebook page, and they weren't all coordinated in any sort of real meaningful way. And nobody had any real guidelines on what they could post or what they should post, or, and, you know, there's some legal issues there about, do you allow comments, and what comments do you respond to, and do you take down comments? And so a lot of that was just getting a policy in place and making sure people followed it. And then if somebody saw a Facebook post that was concerning, it would undoubtedly come to my office of like, oh my gosh, this person posted whatever it was. But really trying to not deal with it on an individual basis, but on a uniform, here's what we want our Facebook presence or whatever to look like, and here's how this should work, and giving some guidelines on like maybe like a best practices sort of thing. And then for press releases, I sometimes drafted them, particularly when they were about a sensitive area that could have legal implications or things like that. Often some of the issues that would somehow impact my office, you know, if I wasn't drafting it, I've definitely edited a number of them, because there are some, you know, things that you can say or shouldn't say, or might be framed in a better way, or, and then sometimes even if it wasn't from a legal perspective, but just as a proficient writer with a awareness of what's going on in that particular instance, you know, I could offer suggestions about, well, would you consider, you know, maybe framing it this way? And maybe there's not a direct legal implication on there, but there could be some pushback that I think as an attorney is in my lane to sort of advise on the political ramifications of something as well. So yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I guess it's come back around to me. I just have one last one. When is 8 p.m. an appropriate work hour?
Wait, when is 8 p.m. an appropriate work
When is
hour?
8 p.m. an appropriate municipal work hour?
When there's a noticed public meeting. I guess so my work hours at the borough, they varied so much because I attended so many public meetings. And so if I was at a public meeting until 1 a.m. or something, I would come in late the next day, and just depending on what my schedule looked like, I just worked what I needed to work to get my job done. We had a comp time system so that any bit of hours over 40 that I worked, I then was able to flex. So, you know, if I was burned out from multiple late nights, then I would go home at noon or something if I didn't have anything pressing the next day, as a way to sort of equalize. And that comp time system was in place for all of the borough employees, where, you know, we stuck pretty closely to tracking hours and things like that. But in my experience at some of these public meetings, you know, 8 p.m. I think is fine. Once you start getting past 10, 11, bad government. People are tired and punchy and have worked their own full days, and they start to lose focus, and crazy things start to happen. And so usually 10 o'clock, I think, was like, I think our air handler system actually would shut down at 10 o'clock. Like you could hear the change in noise. And it was like, okay, this is a pretty good indication that we should all go home and try this again. But, you know, there's often times when, you know, you need to get those conditional use permits approved or whatnot so that development can occur. And, you know, particularly in Fairbanks, where there's a short building season, delays of multiple meetings could be have pretty big consequences. And so there absolutely were times when people were working late and it just needed to be done.
Thank you. I know that was very vague, but you answered how I hoped you would, and not saying, well, I work at 8 p.m. when there's something to do, because I'm not a fan of that. But you are spot on. 8 p.m. unfortunately is the time of meetings, and so you would be required, as you know, to attend meetings and such. And we do follow a similar system here where we're definitely not trying to overwork you. So I'm glad to hear you say that 8 p.m. is not a normal work hour for you. Tim? JJ, did you have any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anne Marie, we've done a lot of our own questions, just like the last interview. I want to turn the floor over to you to see if you have anything for us, anything you might want to know, anything about the community, anything about the assembly. But yeah, if you have questions for us, please feel free at this time.
So my biggest concern, I guess, I heard at the last interview, you all stressing the importance of having your attorney being, a community person. And I agree with you completely. Having an attorney sort of enmeshed in your community can really pay a lot of dividends. Personally, I have a husband with a career, kids that are heavily involved in their extracurricular activities, and I would not be able to move my family to Sitka by like July 1 if that was my start date. I know that's when Brian ends. And so really I'm interested in what your I don't know how well you would palate having me be some sort of hybrid remote worker, at least initially. I would want to come and, I would commit to spending, at least the first month there in person, but then maybe having to come back and wrap things up and then maybe coming back to Sitka again for another chunk of time. And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I know I wouldn't be able to be fully integrated living in your community on day one of the job. So I did want to hear your thoughts on your flexibility there.
Yeah, it's not something that we've discussed as a body. So I hate to answer for the body, but I think it poses an important question for us to discuss in our upcoming deliberations. And I think that that's something that we could get back to you on. I think that this body as a whole wants to be accommodating, but we also have needs and desires as a municipality. So I think that's a question we will pose during some of our deliberation, and then we can get back to you on that one.
Yeah, and I'm not really looking for like, this many days or this just a general sense for this could work, or and if it can't, then great, I know that and I can make a decision with my family, should you decide to offer me the position, what could that look like for us if you're requiring me to be in person on day one. So really just looking for information from you all on where that sits with you.
Yeah. And I appreciate raising the concern, because that's the type of relationship we want to start this out on, so that we can work with a potential candidate here, a potential municipal administrator. So thank you.
And then my next question really is there an ability for me to really chat with Brian Hansen about kind of what some of the legal work like into the nitty gritty of, I don't quite understand your relationship with I'm guessing there's some kind of MOU or MOA with the state on which cases he goes and argues, police cases and things like that. Or maybe you all have some insight into what amount of the workload that looks like.
Yes, our municipal administrator right now, Brian Hansen, has indicated he wants to do everything he can in order to support a successful transition. He cares deeply about Sitka, and just because he's moving out of this role, that doesn't change. So even if we do go past this June 30th date, he's offered his knowledge and expertise. So he would be available in order to backfill you and get you up to speed on that. So I don't have any concerns about that. I think that he would do everything he can to make sure that you hit the ground strongly.
That's great. Those are really the two outstanding questions that I had.
And Tim clarified you may be referring to speaking to Brian right now about those issues.
I certainly would appreciate, maybe we're ahead of the game at this exact minute, but maybe before accepting an offer, just having a conversation with him to get a sort of sense of what his work and workload and hours and schedule kind of looked like would be helpful.
Understood. I have no objection to that. Does any of the assembly? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll send an email to Brian indicating that you may be reaching out and I can connect you to.
That'd be great.
And if I may say, I agree with Steve, the mayor will talk about the details in executive session, but personally, although I'm hoping that you intend to, I would like you here permanently eventually, but I'm cognizant of the stress of moving your family somewhere and, your situation winding down clients and stuff. So I personally don't see any issues with that request.
All right. I'm looking around at the assembly. I don't think there's anything at our side right now. JJ, I can't see you on the screen. Is there anything else from you?
Nope. Thanks. I could offer a joke, but I don't need to.
So Anne Marie, again, thank you for your time. This is much appreciated. I really thank you for your willingness to talk at length on some of these questions, and to give us a sense of who you are. I get a lot more out of an interview when a candidate is willing to open up, as opposed to some simple 1 or 2 word answers. So I really do appreciate this. I could tell from our last interview, where both the assembly and yourself were already chatty, that we needed a little bit of extra time on this one. So that's why we scheduled a little bit of extra time. But I do appreciate you making yourself available for it. It means a lot to the assembly. We will have some further deliberations on this, and then I'm sure HR will be in contact with you in the very near future.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate all of your time coming in on a special meeting just to chat with me. So it goes both ways.
Well, I don't know if you can see behind us, but it's not exactly a bluebird day today. So I would be inside one way or another. All right. Appreciate you. And if you don't have anything else, we'll be in contact soon.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So that has wrapped up our interview this evening. We'll move on to a discussion direction decision about tonight's interview. We do have the ability to meet in executive session if desired.
I would like to go into executive session. I think it's time. But I put away my motion.
I can do it
sheet.
for you.
Thank you.
I move to go into executive session to discuss subjects that may tend to prejudice the reputation and character of a municipal attorney candidate Anne Marie Billingsley, invite in human resources, Denise Salter, and, do we say the last bit?
If you want the opportunity for the candidate to join us, yes.
Can we do it like him say it and then us be without her at first and then
Correct.
we invite her?
Yes.
Okay.
If
And Miss
desired.
Billingsley, when and if desired.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to go into executive session to discuss the interview of our municipal attorney applicant. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, Jess?
On the motion to move into executive session to discuss the subjects that tend to prejudice the reputation and the character of municipal attorney candidate Anne Marie Billingsley, invite in human resource generalist Denise Salter and Miss I'm sorry, Billingsley, when and if desired. Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Miss Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Pike.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. We are going to in the executive session in room 7.
Motion to reconvene?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. We are reconvened as the assembly in regular session. So the assembly did meet in executive session to discuss the interview of Anne Marie Billingsley. Does anybody have a motion?
Where's that motion sheet? Oh, I thought we had. I move to direct staff to schedule a community meet and greet and in-person interview with municipal attorney candidate Anne Marie Billingsley.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to invite Anne Marie Billingsley to an in-person interview and community meet and greet. Is there any public comment? Assembly deliberation? Jeff, please.
Sake, so for public, I'm sure this is recorded and people listen. But I'm very pleased with her candidacy and I look forward to meeting her in person.
As well.
Okay.
Jess?
On the motion to direct staff to schedule a community meet and greet and in-person interview with municipal attorney candidate Anna Marie Billingsley. Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbeis,
Yes?
Ms. Carlson, Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mr. Saline.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. That ends our business this evening. Bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual. Seeing none, bring us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We had enough assembly members vote to adjourn. We are adjourned.